This week on WorldView, despite the détente, India and China exchanged sharp words over Arunachal Pradesh after an Indian woman is detained at Shanghai airport. Is the dispute a sign of rising tensions between Delhi and Beijing, or part of a larger geopolitical development that involves the US, Japan, and possibly the future of the Quad? Hello and welcome. This is WorldView at The Hindu. I'm Suhasini Haidar. Now, this week saw an unusual spat between Delhi and Beijing after more than a year of repair in relations, when Pema Tongduk, an Indian woman, was pulled out of a security line during her transit in Shanghai on the way to Japan, detained for more than 12 hours after her passport, they said, showed that she had been born in Arunachal Pradesh. While passengers being questioned, detained, deported may not be so unusual worldwide, what followed was a full diplomatic spat over territory between the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. So what happened after Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Mao Ning said this?
First of all, Zhangnan is China's territory. China never acknowledges the so-called Arunachal Pradesh, illegally set up by India. As for the individual case you mentioned, we've learned that during the whole process, China's border inspection authorities have gone through the whole process in accordance with laws and regulations and had just enforcement and fully protected the lawful rights and interests of the person concerned.
MEA spokesperson Randeep Jaiswal responded sharply.
Arunachal Pradesh is an integral and inalienable part of India, and this is a fact which is self-evident. No amount of denial by the Chinese side is going to change this indisputable reality. At the same time, I said that we did take up this matter. We did do a strong démarche.
So let's give you a bit of history here. Arunachal Pradesh, India's easternmost state, has historically been a part of India. It was delineated by what was also called the McMahon Line after an agreement between British India and Tibet in 1914. China refused to accept that line, especially after it invaded Tibet. And even though it had actually accepted the McMahon Line over Burma or Myanmar, it calls Arunachal Pradesh South Tibet or Zangnan. In 2010, particularly, China issued stapled visas for residents of Arunachal Pradesh. So this was a new tack, not very old. It then refused visas altogether to Arunachal citizens of India, claiming this is Chinese territory and that they were in fact Chinese citizens. India has responded quietly, ceasing any reference to a one China policy in any of its bilateral communications until Beijing accepts India's borders. China has also carried out other measures over Arunachal Pradesh. Remember, this is just one of the three sectors of the disputed line of actual control. But here's what it has done in Arunachal in particular. Firstly, renaming of Arunachal towns on Chinese maps. It's done it more than 4 times in the last 6 years. A heavy build-up on the border and the villages over there and populations to bolster its claim. Transgressions by the PLA along the Arunachal border, including a major clash in December 2022. The construction of hydropower projects upstream over the Brahmaputra or the Yarlung Sangpo. India has protested this even recently this year. And broadening the dispute by claiming now a tri-junction with Bhutan on its eastern border at Sakteng, that is close to Tawang. Even so, this was the first such exchange we saw since the Modi-Xi meeting in Kazan last October, followed by Prime Minister Modi's trip to Tianjin in August this year for the SCO summit, where, of course, he famously met Xi Jinping. In the last few months, remember, after 4 years of the border standoff post-Galwan, the two sides have actually taken a number of measures, agreed to pull back from the line of actual control, putting buffer zones in place, and restoring patrol in many areas along the 3,000 plus kilometer boundary. India and China have restored all levels of bilateral contact. We've seen so many meetings in the last few months, resumed flights, including this month, a Delhi-Shanghai flight from expected. Both sides have restarted visas for tourists and business persons that had been stalled and resumed border trade, as well as the pilgrimage to Kailash Mansarovar. And we've been speaking about these on Worldview. Investment regulations have not been changed on India's side yet. That's something China still is hoping for. Meanwhile, territorial tensions, so it wasn't just India and China this week, territorial tensions between Japan and China were even more pronounced. China hit back over comments this month by Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, who said that any Chinese takeover of Taiwan would become an existential threat for Japan. Seen as very strong language. China immediately hit back, demanded those comments be retracted. It stopped importing Japanese seafood, makes up about 25% of Japan's export of seafood. Mass cancellations of tourists, they make up at least a quarter of Japan's tourism budget as well. Those have been cancelled. Japanese film releases, other cultural exchanges in China have been stopped. This is all over the past week or so. And on the waters, we're seeing tensions soaring over missile deployment plans near Taiwan by Japan and increased Chinese patrols around Taiwan and the Senkaku Islands. We've also seen some comments coming in from Russia about patrolling those areas after Japanese reports. Is there even a broader worry, however, particularly when it comes to US-China relations? Because this kind of tension is one worry. The other tension, the US-China ties getting closer, particularly for India. To begin with, Trump made that comment about the G2 between US and China just before he met with Xi Jinping in South Korea. That's been interpreted as a move to carve up spheres of influence in the world, and India is certainly worried about that, as is the rest of Asia. The second, really, a call this week, a telephone call between Xi Jinping and Trump over the Japanese tensions, followed by a call between President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi, where the US reportedly counseled Japan to lower its volume on Taiwan. US-China talks over trade, critical minerals, are also worrying as the rest of Asia feels they could be cut out of any kind of competition becoming cooperation between the two. Meanwhile, this is something being watched in Washington, a US national defense strategy that had been planned much earlier this year. It's been delayed, and all eyes on whether Trump's prioritization of homeland security could actually translate to lower resources for the Indo-Pacific, just as the US has done with Europe over the Ukraine conflict. 2025 marked the second year that India could not host the Quad Summit. So this is another repercussion of US-China rapprochement and better ties, if you like. So the bigger question over its role will be asked, particularly if Trump, for example, comes for the Quad Summit next year, but just after his visit to China expected in April. So all of these moves being watched very closely. Also keep an eye out for the Putin visit, Russian President Putin coming to Delhi in early December, whether the US's new 28-point peace proposal that's been rejected by Ukraine because it's seen as too favorable to Russia makes any headway by then. So what's Worldview's take? Tensions between India and China may have reduced over the past year, and engagement definitely increased, but trust in a stable relationship has not returned, which explains the sudden flashpoint over Arunachal Pradesh. New Delhi must not, however, lose sight of the larger moves at play geopolitically as well between the US and China and the US and Russia, and it must protect its own interest from the fallout of those ties by strengthening its own engagement with all three global powers, so not one or the other. Let's get you some Worldview reading recommendations now. And the first is, of course, the Hindu's own book called China, Indian Perspectives on China's Politics, Economy, and Foreign Relations. As I said, published by the Hindu, curated by Anand Krishnan. It includes essays by Vijay Gokhale, Ashok Kanta, Manoj Joshi, Santosh Pai, particularly on trade between India and China. It's very important. Two upcoming books I can recommend because I've had a preview of them. One is called Taming the Dragon, a manifesto for a new modus vivendi with China. This is written by Manoj Kevalramani. Also, another book called India and the Rebalancing of Asia by C. Rajamohan. Both of these are forward-looking books at the India-China relationship and what it means for the entire region. The third book it's called The Third Revolution, Xi Jinping and the New Chinese State. This is by Elizabeth Economy. I've read her previous book, The World According to China. I'm certainly looking forward to reading this one. It's got very good reviews, particularly as it looks with how Xi Jinping is really tightening his control, not only of the country, but of its resources in terms of the rest of the world. And to that point, the last book called Global Tech War, China's Race to Dominate by James King. I was able to find an audiobook, but you might find others as well. So we hope you enjoy reading all of these, and do join us again here on WorldView from the team. Thanks for watching.